The diplomatic quarters felt too quiet. Dan Walsh checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes, then forced himself to stop. Across the room, Layla Okoye was reviewing files on her tablet, her expression calm despite the tension that had been building all day. Ambassador Hiroshi Tanaka sat near the window, watching the purple gas giant rotate slowly beyond the station's hull. They had arrived at Station Meridian 6 hours ago. The security screening alone had taken 4 of those hours. Dan had worked as a park ranger for 15 years before joining the diplomatic corps, and he recognized the look in Commander Roth's eyes during the interrogation. The Roth security chief did not trust humans. More than that, he seemed personally offended by their presence. "Your planet is listed as a Class 9 hazard world," Roth had said, his scaled face pulled into what might have been a sneer. "Yet you claim to walk among apex predators without weapons or armor. You claim to thrive in conditions that would kill most species within hours. Forgive me if I find these claims difficult to believe." Hiroshi had remained patient throughout the questioning. He explained that Earth was indeed dangerous by galactic standards. Predators roamed every continent. The weather could shift from calm to deadly in minutes. Diseases, parasites, and toxic plants covered much of the surface. Humans had not conquered Earth through superior strength or advanced technology. They had adapted, learned, and most importantly, understood the patterns of life around them. Roth had not believed a word of it. Dan could see it in the way the commander's claws tapped against his desk, in the way his eyes narrowed when Layla mentioned growing up near lion territories in Kenya. To the Roth and most other species on the station, humans looked soft. They had no natural armor, no venomous bite, no claws worth mentioning. Their bodies seemed fragile compared to the robust frames of species like the Roth or the chitinous shells of the insectoid Velians. A soft chime broke the silence. All 3 humans looked up as Counselor Breen's voice came through the communication system. The insectoid administrator sounded agitated, his translator struggling to keep up with his rapid clicks and whistles. "Human delegation, please remain calm. There has been a security incident. Commander Roth has implemented a compatibility test. Please do not attempt to leave your quarters or activate any alarm systems. This is for your own safety." Layla stood immediately. "What kind of test?" No response came. Instead, the sound of heavy blast doors sealing echoed through the corridor outside. Dan moved to the door and pressed the access panel. Nothing happened. They were locked in. "This is not standard protocol," Hiroshi said quietly. His calm voice did not match the worry in his eyes. Breen sounded frightened. Through the wall, something growled. The sound was low and resonant, vibrating through the metal structure of the station. Dan had heard similar sounds before, in the mountains of Montana when stumbling too close to a grizzly den. This was the sound of a predator, and it was close. The door to their quarters suddenly opened. Dan stepped back instinctively, his body moving into a defensive stance without conscious thought. The growl came again, louder now, and a shape entered the room. It was a 6-legged creature about the size of a large dog, with gray striped fur and ridges of crystalline spikes running along its spine. A metal muzzle covered its mouth, but Dan could see rows of sharp teeth behind the wire mesh. Its eyes were yellow and slitted, fixed on the 3 humans with unmistakable hostility. Blood matted the fur around the muzzle, and the creature moved with a slight limp. The door sealed behind it with a pneumatic hiss. Yuki Sato, the medical officer who had been resting in the adjoining room, appeared in the doorway. She froze when she saw the creature, but her hand immediately moved to her medical bag. Through the observation windows that lined one wall, Dan could see alien faces pressed against the glass. Commander Roth stood in the center, his arms crossed, watching. Other species representatives crowded around him, some looking curious, others appearing horrified. Counselor Breen was gesturing frantically, his mandibles clicking in obvious distress. The creature in their quarters took a step forward, its growl deepening. The crystalline spikes along its back rose, catching the artificial light. It lowered its head in a clear threat display. "Do not run," Dan said softly. He kept his voice level and calm, the same tone he had used countless times when dealing with frightened or aggressive animals. "Nobody move suddenly. Keep your hands visible." The creature's eyes tracked each of them, assessing threats. Its muscles were tense, coiled like springs ready to release. Dan recognized the signs immediately. This was not the behavior of a confident predator looking for prey. This was fear aggression. The animal was terrified and cornered, lashing out because it expected to be hurt. Layla's sharp intake of breath told him she had reached the same conclusion. As a xenobiologist, she would recognize the physical signs even in an alien species. The creature was underweight, its fur patchy in places. The muzzle was too tight, cutting into the skin around its jaw. The limp suggested an untreated injury. "They brought a baby," Layla whispered, barely audible. "That is just a juvenile." Hiroshi's expression hardened. "They released a young, injured predator into our quarters as a test." The creature took another step forward, its growl turning into a snarl. Outside, the alien observers leaned closer to the windows. Dan could imagine what they expected to see. Humans screaming, panicking, calling for help, proving once and for all that they were not the dangerous Deathworlders they claimed to be. But Dan had not survived 15 years in the wilderness by panicking. Neither had Layla, who had spent her childhood in regions where apex predators outnumbered people. Hiroshi had negotiated treaties in war zones and natural disaster areas. Yuki had provided emergency medical care in conditions that would have broken most people. Earth had trained them well. Dan slowly lowered himself to one knee, making his body smaller and less threatening. The creature's ears, partially hidden under the metallic muzzle straps, twitched at the movement, its yellow eyes fixed on him with laser focus. "Easy," Dan murmured, his voice soft and rhythmic. "Nobody here wants to hurt you." "You are safe now." The creature stopped advancing. Its head tilted slightly, confusion mixing with the fear in its eyes. Whatever it had expected from the soft-looking mammals in front of it, this was not it. Outside the observation windows, the alien observers fell silent. Commander Ralph's confident posture shifted slightly. Something in the room had changed, though none of them could yet understand what it meant. Dan extended one hand slowly, palm down, and waited. The creature stared at Dan's outstretched hand. Its crystalline spikes remained raised and the muscles in its 6 legs trembled with tension. For a long moment, nothing moved except the gentle rotation of the gas giant beyond the windows. Dan kept his breathing steady and slow. His hand did not waver. He had learned long ago that animals could sense fear and uncertainty in the smallest movements, in the quickest breath. Right now, this frightened juvenile needed to see calm. It needed to understand that the humans were not a threat. "You can see the injury on its left rear leg," Layla said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had moved to the side, giving the creature space while positioning herself where she could observe better. "The way it is holding that leg suggests a strained tendon, or possibly a fracture that healed incorrectly. The muzzle is digging into the skin," Yuki added from her position near the wall. Her medical training made her focus on the physical damage immediately visible. "That has been on for several days at least. There is infection around the straps." Hiroshi remained seated, making himself non-threatening through stillness. "Commander Ralph wanted us to panic. He wanted us to scream for help or try to escape. He wanted proof that humans are not suited for a galaxy with real predators. Then let us prove him wrong," Dan said. He shifted his weight slightly, settling more comfortably into his kneeling position. The creature's eyes followed the movement, but it did not retreat or advance. Progress. Outside the observation windows, more aliens had gathered. Dan could see at least 20 different species now, all watching in silence. A tall, bird-like Velian held some kind of recording device. Counselor Breen had stopped his frantic gesturing and now simply watched, his compound eyes reflecting the light in thousands of tiny points. The creature took a tentative step toward Dan. Its nose, barely visible behind the cruel muzzle, twitched as it tested the air. Dan knew this behavior. The animal was gathering information, trying to understand what these strange beings were and whether they posed a danger. "I have food," Yuki said softly. She moved with agonizing slowness, reaching into her medical bag and pulling out a protein bar. The standard issue rations were designed to be nutritionally complete for most carbon-based life forms. She broke off a small piece and held it out toward the creature. The juvenile's attention shifted to the food. Its body language changed immediately. The aggressive posture melted into something more desperate. The creature wanted the food but did not trust the source. "Slide it across the floor," Layla suggested. "Let it come to the food rather than having to approach us directly." Yuki nodded and gently rolled the piece of protein bar across the smooth floor. It stopped about halfway between her and the creature. The juvenile watched it roll, its yellow eyes tracking every movement. Then slowly, It limped forward. The creature snatched the food and retreated several steps before attempting to eat it through the muzzle. The metal cage prevented it from properly chewing. Frustrated whimpers replaced the growls as it tried and failed to consume the morsel it could smell but not reach. "We need to remove that muzzle," Dan said. His voice held an edge of anger now, directed not at the creature but at whoever had caused this suffering. "It is starving and injured, and that thing is making everything worse. If we remove it, the observers will expect an attack," Hiroshi warned. "Ralph probably wants that to happen. He wants us to free the creature and then get hurt. It would prove his point perfectly." "I do not care what Ralph wants," Layla said firmly. She began moving slowly toward the creature, her hands visible and empty. "No animal deserves this treatment. Juvenile predators are protected under consortium law for exactly this reason. Someone captured this baby illegally and hurt it. We are going to fix that." The creature watched her approach with wary eyes. Its spikes lowered slightly, no longer at full threat display. Confusion seemed to be overtaking fear. These strange aliens were behaving in ways it did not understand. Layla began speaking in a soft, constant stream of words. The content did not matter. The creature could not understand human language. What mattered was the tone, the rhythm, the gentle cadence that every human parent used with frightened children and every animal handler used with scared creatures. It was a sound that transcended species, a universal signal of care and protection. "Look at you, so brave and so scared at the same time. You have been through something terrible, have you not? But that is over now. These people here, we understand. We have seen injured animals before. We know how to help. You do not have to be afraid anymore." The creature's ears, pinned flat against its head, began to relax. One ear rotated forward, focusing on Layla's voice. The crystalline spikes along its back lowered another increment. Dan used the distraction to move slowly closer as well. He pulled out his own protein bar and broke it into several small pieces, placing them on the floor in a line that led toward Layla. The creature would have to trust them enough to approach if it wanted the food. "Smart," Yuki murmured. She had retrieved her medical scanner and was taking readings from across the room, not wanting to spook their visitor with sudden movements. "The readings confirm malnutrition. This animal has not had a proper meal in at least a week, maybe longer." Through the observation windows, Commander Ralph shifted his weight. His confident posture had developed cracks of uncertainty. This was not going according to his plan. The humans should have been cowering in corners or trying to force their way out of the sealed quarters. Instead, they were approaching the most dangerous predator most species had ever seen, and they were doing it without weapons or armor. The creature made a decision. It limped forward and took another piece of the protein bar, struggling again with the muzzle. This time it did not retreat as far. It stayed within reach of Dan, watching him with those intelligent yellow eyes. "May I try to remove the muzzle?" Dan asked, directing his question at the creature even though it could not understand the words. What mattered was the tone, asking for permission rather than taking by force. "I know it hurts. I can make it stop hurting." He reached toward the strap slowly, giving the creature every opportunity to pull away or snap at him. His fingers touched the metal clasp that held the muzzle shut. The creature went completely still. Every muscle froze. Dan could feel it trembling under his touch. "Almost done," he whispered. "Just another second." The clasp released with a soft click. Dan carefully pulled the muzzle away from the creature's face. Blood and infection marked where the metal had cut into tender skin. The creature's mouth opened and closed experimentally, testing its freedom. Then it looked directly at Dan, and something shifted in its expression. The fear was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Something that looked almost like gratitude. The creature carefully took another piece of protein bar from the floor. This time it could chew properly, and the desperate hunger in its eyes finally began to ease. 2 hours had passed since the muzzle came off. The creature now sat between Dan and Layla, its body no longer tense with fear. Yuki had managed to clean and treat the wounds around its face, working with gentle efficiency while Dan kept the animal calm with soft words and steady hands. The juvenile had allowed the treatment without resistance, seeming to understand that these strange beings were trying to help. Hiroshi had been speaking through the communication system to Counselor Breen, demanding answers about where this creature had come from and who was responsible for its condition. The insectoid administrator had been apologetic and horrified in equal measure, claiming he had known nothing about Ralph's plan until it was already in motion. Now he was frantically searching through security records and cargo manifests. "This species is called a Kryn." Breen's voice crackled through the speakers. "They are apex predators from a world with gravity twice that of Earth. Adult Kryn have killed 17 different species representatives over the past century. They are considered the most dangerous natural predators in known space. No species has ever successfully approached one without weapons or protective barriers." Through the observation windows, Dan could see the crowd of aliens had grown even larger. Word had spread throughout the station. Species from every section had come to witness the impossible sight of humans sitting calmly with a Kryn juvenile. "How old is this one?" Layla asked, running her hand gently along the creature's back. The crystalline spikes had folded down completely flat, creating a smooth ridge rather than a threatening display. The Kryn leaned into her touch, a rumbling sound emerging from its chest that might have been a purr. "Based on size, approximately 4 months old," Breen replied. "Far too young to be separated from its parent. Kryn young stay with their mothers for at least 2 years. This capture was illegal on multiple levels. The creature, which Dan had started calling Ash in his mind due to the gray stripes in its fur, suddenly climbed into his lap. It took the human completely by surprise. The juvenile was heavier than it looked, probably close to 40 kilograms. It circled twice, its 6 legs working in a complex pattern, then settled down with its head resting against Dan's chest. "I think it has imprinted on you," Layla said softly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You were the first one to show it kindness. In its mind, you might be a parental figure now." "Great," Dan muttered. But his hands were already moving to support the creature's weight and stroke its fur. "What am I supposed to do with an apex predator that thinks I am its parent?" "Love it and keep it safe," Yuki said simply. She had finished treating the leg injury and was now preparing a more substantial meal for their guest. The medical scanner indicated that Ash needed protein, minerals, and several specific nutrients that the juvenile had been lacking. That is what parents do. Ash's breathing had slowed, becoming deep and regular. The creature's eyes drifted closed. Within minutes, the most dangerous predator in known space was asleep in Dan's arms, snoring softly. The observation deck had fallen completely silent. Commander Ralph stood frozen, his scaled face unreadable. A Velian scientist had dropped her recording device. Counselor Breen's mandibles hung open in shock. "This should not be possible," Breen whispered, his voice barely audible through the communication system. "Adult Kryn are aggressive toward all other species. They attack on sight. They cannot be reasoned with or calmed. We have decades of documentation proving this." "Maybe you have been approaching them wrong," Hiroshi suggested quietly. His eyes were on Dan and the sleeping Kryn, his expression thoughtful. "Humans spent thousands of years learning to live alongside predators. We learned their languages, their body signals, their needs. We discovered that most predators only attack when they feel threatened, or when they are desperately hungry." Layla nodded in agreement. "Predators are not monsters. They are animals trying to survive. This baby was scared and hurt and hungry. It acted aggressively because it expected more pain. When we showed it gentleness instead, its entire behavior changed." "You people are insane," a new voice said. Commander Ralph had activated his own communication channel. "You removed the muzzle from a Kryn. You touched it with bare hands. You allowed it to approach you without any protective measures. Any of those actions should have resulted in severe injury or death. And yet here we are," Dan said, not looking up from the sleeping creature in his arms, "alive and well with a very tired baby who just needed someone to care about it." Ralph's claws scraped against the observation window. "You cannot keep it. When it wakes, it will remember it is a predator. It will attack." "It will do no such thing," Layla said firmly. "This is a juvenile that is bonded with us. Watch what happens when it wakes up, Commander. Watch and learn." As if responding to the conversation, Ash stirred in Dan's arms. The Kryn's eyes opened slowly, yellow slits focusing on the world. For a moment, the creature seemed confused about where it was. Then it looked up at Dan's face and its entire body relaxed again. A small chirping sound emerged from its throat. Different from the growls and snarls from before, it was a sound of contentment. Yuki approached with a bowl of food she had prepared using protein supplements and nutrients from the medical supplies. Ash's nose twitched, catching the scent. The creature climbed carefully out of Dan's lap and approached the bowl with interest. "Watch how it eats," Layla said, directing her comments toward the observation deck. "There is no aggression, no food guarding. It trusts us enough to eat in our presence. That is a sign of a deep bond. Ash ate slowly, its injured leg held carefully off the ground. When it finished, it did not return to Dan immediately. Instead, it approached Yuki and pressed its head against her leg, rubbing in a gesture that looked remarkably like affection. The medic laughed softly and scratched behind the creature's ears. "This is unprecedented," Breen said. His voice held wonder now rather than fear. "In 4 months, this juvenile Kryn has probably never known kindness. It was captured, caged, muzzled, starved, and in 2 hours you have turned it into this." "We did not turn it into anything," Hiroshi corrected gently. "We simply showed it that not all beings are cruel. We treated it the way any creature deserves to be treated." Through the windows, some of the alien observers were speaking urgently into their own communication devices. Dan could see gestures, rapid conversations, the clear signs of people reporting what they had witnessed to others who were not present. Commander Rolth remained silent now, but his posture had changed. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something that might have been confusion or perhaps the first stirrings of respect. Ash finished making rounds to each of the humans, greeting them with chirps and gentle head presses. Then the creature returned to Dan and climbed back into his lap. Within moments, the Kryn was asleep again, its breathing deep and peaceful. Dan looked up at the observation windows and met Commander Rolth's eyes. He did not speak, did not gloat, did not make any gesture of triumph. He simply held the sleeping predator and waited for the Rolth commander to understand what he was seeing. Sometimes the strongest message was delivered in silence. News traveled fast through Station Meridian. By the time Ash woke from his second nap, video footage of the humans with the Kryn juvenile had circulated through every communication network in the facility. Species representatives who had been skeptical of human claims were now demanding explanations. Those who had supported human admission to the consortium were using the incident as proof of humanity's unique value. Dan sat on the floor with his back against the wall, Ash curled up beside him. The creature had refused to move more than a few feet from the human since waking, following him everywhere with the devotion of a puppy. Every few minutes, Ash would press his head against Dan's hand, demanding attention. "The Consortium Council has called an emergency session," Hiroshi announced, reading from his tablet. "They want to discuss the incident and determine whether Commander Rolth should face consequences for his unauthorized test." "Good," Layla said sharply. She was documenting Ash's behavior and physical condition, creating a detailed report that would serve as evidence of the abuse the juvenile had suffered. What he did was illegal and dangerous. That muzzle could have killed Ash if we had not removed it. The infection was already spreading. Through the communication system, Counselor Breen's voice crackled to life again. "Human delegation, I must apologize again for Commander Rolth's actions. The Council has reviewed security footage and agrees that his test violated multiple protocols. However, they also want to discuss something else with you." "What is that?" Hiroshi asked. "Your demonstrated ability to calm aggressive predators," Breen replied. "There are several situations across consortium space where dangerous animals have caused problems. Species have tried every solution from relocation to elimination, but nothing has worked without significant loss of life. The Council wonders if humans might be able to help." Dan exchanged glances with Layla and Yuki. The xenobiologist's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of situations?" "There is a colony on the planet Quell, where a large aquatic creature has been attacking settlement structures. The colonists believe it is territorial aggression, but they cannot communicate with it or drive it away. 16 Quellans have died in the past year. Territorial aggression usually has a cause," Layla said thoughtfully. "The creature probably does not see the structures as settlements. It sees them as threats or competitors in its territory." "Exactly what I told them," Breen said, a note of satisfaction in his translated voice. "But Quellans are not predators themselves. They do not understand predator behavior." "You clearly do." Before anyone could respond, the door to their quarters opened. Commander Rolth entered, accompanied by 2 other Rolth security officers. Ash immediately stood, placing himself between Dan and the newcomers. The creature's spikes rose slightly and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Easy, Ash," Dan said softly, placing a hand on the Kryn's back. "They are not here to hurt you." Rolth stopped several feet away, his eyes fixed on the juvenile Kryn. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice lacking the aggressive edge from before. "I came to admit that I was wrong. the commander said. My test was designed to prove that humans are weak and unsuited for the consortium. Instead, it proved that I do not understand strength at all. Hiroshi stood, his expression neutral. Commander, you put us in danger and abused an innocent animal. Your admission does not erase that. I know, Ralph said. He looked down at his clawed hands. The Hrolth measure strength through combat prowess and physical dominance. We believe that predators respect only force. Watching you with that Kryn challenged everything I was taught. Predators do not respect force, Layla explained. They respect understanding. They respond to beings who communicate in ways they comprehend. Force creates fear, and fear creates aggression. Gentleness creates trust. My people have been wrong, Ralph continued. We have treated aggressive animals as enemies to be destroyed. We never considered that they might simply be frightened or defending themselves. Ash had stopped growling. The Kryn was watching Ralph carefully, his body still tense but no longer aggressive. Dan kept his hand on the creature's back, a constant source of reassurance. What do you want from us, Commander? Dan asked. I want to learn, Ralph said simply. I want to understand how you do this. The Hrolth have lost many soldiers to predator attacks over the years. If there is another way, a better way, I need to know it. Yuki, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Learning to understand predators takes time and patience. It requires letting go of the idea that everything dangerous must be fought or controlled. Are you willing to do that? I am willing to try, Ralph said. He gestured toward Ash. May I approach the juvenile? I want to see if I can apply what I have observed. Dan looked at Ash, then back at Ralph. Move slowly. Keep your hands visible. Lower your body to seem less threatening. And most importantly, do not expect immediate results. Trust is earned, not demanded. Ralph nodded and began moving forward. He crouched down, making himself smaller. His movements were awkward and uncertain, completely unlike his usual confident stride. Ash watched him approach, ears swiveling to track every sound. Speak to him, Dan instructed. Your voice does not matter, but the tone does. Soft and steady. Hello, small one, Ralph said, his deep voice dropping to an unusually gentle register. I am sorry for what was done to you. These humans have shown you kindness. I would like to do the same. Ash tilted his head, considering. The Kryn took one step toward Ralph, then stopped. Waiting. Offer your hand palm down, Dan suggested. Let him come to you. Ralph extended his clawed hand slowly. Ash sniffed the air, processing scents and information. Then, to everyone's surprise, the Kryn moved forward and pressed his nose against Ralph's palm. The commander's eyes widened. He is allowing contact. He is giving you a chance, Layla corrected. Do not waste it. Stroke his head gently, the same way you would comfort a child. Ralph's hand moved carefully to Ash's head. The Kryn accepted the touch, his eyes half closing. A soft chirp emerged from his throat. This is remarkable, Ralph whispered. I can feel him relaxing. He was tense when I approached, but now he is calm. Because you showed him respect, Dan said. You asked permission instead of taking. That makes all the difference. The moment was interrupted by Counselor Breen's voice through the communication system. Commander Ralph, the Council requests your presence immediately. The hearing has begun. Ralph withdrew his hand slowly, not wanting to startle Ash. He stood and looked at the human delegation with an expression that might have been respect or gratitude. Thank you for this lesson. I will not forget it. After the Hrolth officers left, Hiroshi turned to the others. Things are changing. The Council sees us differently now. The whole station sees us differently. Because we treated a baby with kindness? Yuki asked. Because we did something they thought was impossible, Hiroshi replied. We took their most feared predator and turned it into a sleeping companion. That changes their understanding of what humans are capable of. Ash yawned, showing rows of sharp teeth, and then climbed back into Dan's lap. The creature circled once and settled down, preparing for another nap. Dan smiled and scratched behind the Kryn's ears. I hope Ash's parents are found soon, Dan said quietly. He belongs with his own kind, not here on a station. Breen is searching the databases now, Layla assured him. Kryn are rare, and the capture of a juvenile is a serious crime. Someone will know where he came from. Through the observation windows, Dan could see aliens still watching, but their expressions had changed. The fear and skepticism were gone, replaced by curiosity and wonder. Some were even smiling, or whatever their species equivalent might be. Humanity had passed a test they had not known they were taking, and in doing so, they had opened a door to a future none of them had imagined. 3 days after the incident, Counselor Breen brought news that changed everything. He arrived at the human quarters with obvious excitement, his mandibles clicking rapidly in the way that indicated strong emotion among his species. "We found them," Breen announced through the communication system. "Ash's parents. They have been searching for him since his capture 4 months ago. They are on their way to the station now." Dan felt his heart sink and soar at the same time. Ash deserved to be reunited with his family. But over the past 3 days, the juvenile Kryn had become more than just a rescued animal. He had become a companion, a responsibility, something close to family. Ash seemed to sense the change in mood. The Kryn pressed closer to Dan, chirping softly in concern. "When will they arrive?" Hiroshi asked. 6 hours, Breen replied. "But there is something you should know. Adult Kryn are not like the juvenile. They are 9 feet tall and weigh over 300 kilograms. They are territorial and protective of their young. The parents have demanded to see their offspring immediately upon arrival, and they are not happy about what happened to him. We can explain that we helped him," Layla said. "Surely they will understand." "The Kryn do not trust other species," Breen continued. "They have good reason. Kryn cubs are valuable on the black market because of their crystalline spikes. Poachers have taken many juveniles over the years. When Ash's parents arrive, they will be prepared for a fight. Then we will show them we are not their enemies," Dan said firmly. He looked down at Ash, who was watching him with those intelligent yellow eyes. "Just like we showed this little one." The next 6 hours passed in tense preparation. The station's security forces established multiple containment protocols. Commander Ralph personally oversaw the arrangements, though Dan noticed the Hrolth commander's approach had changed significantly. Instead of focusing solely on weapons and barriers, Ralph was consulting with Layla about Kryn behavior and communication signals. "The parents will enter through the main docking bay," Ralph explained. "We have cleared the entire section. Only essential personnel will remain, and they will stay behind reinforced barriers." "I want to be there when they arrive," Dan said. "Ash should see familiar faces." "That is dangerous," Ralph warned. "These are not juveniles. If they perceive you as a threat to their offspring, they will attack without hesitation." "Then we make sure they do not perceive us as threats," Hiroshi said. "We have learned how to communicate with their son. Perhaps we can communicate with them as well." When the Kryn ship docked, alarms echoed throughout the station. Species evacuated from entire sections. Behind protective barriers, hundreds of aliens watched the events unfold through monitors and observation windows. The tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. The airlock opened. 3 massive Kryn emerged. 2 were the parents, their crystalline spikes fully extended in aggressive displays that caught the light like deadly rainbows. The 3rd was an older Kryn, gray around the muzzle and moving with the careful dignity of age. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Their yellow eyes scanned the docking bay with predator intensity, looking for threats and finding none they could reach. When they spotted the human delegation standing in the open with Ash, all 3 Kryn froze. Ash chirped excitedly and tried to run forward, but Dan held him gently back. "Wait," he said softly. "Let them come to us. They need to see you are safe first." The mother Kryn, slightly larger than the father, took a step forward. A deep rumbling growl emerged from her chest, a sound that vibrated through the deck plating. Behind their barriers, several alien observers fled in panic. "We mean no harm," Hiroshi called out, his voice carrying across the bay. "Your child is safe. He has been cared for and protected. We want nothing more than to return him to you." The elder Kryn moved forward, placing herself between the parents and the humans. She studied the delegation carefully, her eyes lingering on Ash. The juvenile was clean, well-fed, and healthy. The injuries had been treated. His spikes gleamed with proper grooming. "Let the young one go," the elder said. Her voice came through a translator device attached to a collar around her neck. "If you truly mean no harm, you will release him now." Dan loosened his gentle hold on Ash. "Go to your family. They have been looking for you." Ash hesitated. He looked up at Dan with an expression that seemed almost questioning. Then he looked at his parents. The juvenile took one step toward his family, then stopped and looked back at Dan again. "It is okay," Dan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You belong with them. Go on." Ash ran then, his 6 legs carrying him across the bay to his waiting parents. The mother and father immediately surrounded him, their massive bodies creating a protective barrier as they examined their lost child. Soft chirps and rumbles of communication passed between them, a family language that needed no translation. The elder Kryn continued to watch the humans. She took several steps closer, her movements deliberate and controlled. You cared for our young one. The poachers who took him did not. They hurt him, starved him, used him as a tool to frighten others, yet you healed his wounds and showed him kindness. Why? Because he needed help, Layla said simply. We do not abandon children who are suffering no matter what species they belong to. Even when that child is a predator capable of killing you? The elder asked. Especially then, Dan replied. Predators are not monsters. They are living beings trying to survive in a dangerous universe. We understand that. Earth taught us that. The mother Kryn approached now, leaving Ash with his father. She was even larger up close, towering over the humans. Her breath came in hot puffs, and her crystalline spikes were still partially raised. She lowered her massive head until her eyes were level with Dan's. For a long moment she simply stared at him. Dan held her gaze, not backing down but showing no aggression either. He had looked into the eyes of grizzly bears and mountain lions. He knew how to face a predator with respect rather than fear. You are the one he bonded with, the mother said. It was not a question. I can smell you on him. He carries your scent like a parent's mark. I was the first one he trusted after his capture, Dan admitted. I tried to keep him safe until you could be found. The mother's eyes narrowed. Then slowly she lowered her head further and pressed it against Dan's chest. It was the same gesture Ash had made, the same sign of trust and affection. Dan carefully raised his hands and placed them on either side of her massive head, accepting the gesture. You protected my child when I could not, the mother said softly. The Kryn do not forget such debts. You have earned the friendship of my family and my people. She pulled back and returned to her family. The father Kryn nodded once at the humans, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Ash chirped happily, surrounded by his parents and the elder. I am Greth, the elder Kryn said. I speak for the Kryn homeworld in matters of diplomacy. We have heard of humans and their claims to be Deathworlders. We dismiss those claims because humans look soft and weak. We were wrong. You were not wrong about how we look, Hiroshi said with a slight smile. We are soft and weak compared to most species. But we learn to survive not through strength, but through understanding. We learn to live alongside creatures far more dangerous than ourselves. This is a valuable skill, Greth said. One that the galaxy needs. The Kryn will support human admission to the consortium. More than that, we offer formal alliance with your people. Humanity has shown itself worthy of trust. Behind their protective barriers, the alien observers erupted in excited chatter. Commander Ralph looked stunned. Counselor Breen was clicking his mandibles so rapidly the translator could barely keep up. Ash approached Dan one more time. The juvenile rubbed against his legs, chirping softly. Dan knelt down and embraced the Kryn, memorizing the feel of the soft fur and the warmth of the small body. Be good for your parents, Dan whispered. Grow up strong and brave. Remember that there are beings in this galaxy who care about you. Ash chirped once more and then returned to his family. The 4 Kryn moved toward their ship, preparing to depart. But Greth paused at the airlock and looked back at the humans. This will not be the last time we meet, the elder said. The Kryn do not forget our friends. When you need us, we will come, and perhaps in time you can teach others what you have taught us today. The airlock sealed. The Kryn ship detached from the station and moved away into space, carrying Ash back to his homeworld and the life he deserved. Dan watched until the ship disappeared from view. His chest felt tight and his eyes burned with unshed tears. Yuki placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, she said softly. I know, Dan replied, but that does not make it easier. Hiroshi's tablet chimed with an incoming message. He read it and smiled. The Consortium Council has scheduled a vote on human membership. Thanks to the Kryn endorsement in the past 3 days, opposition has collapsed. We are going to be accepted. Because we helped a baby, Layla said wonderingly. Because we showed them what humanity really is, Hiroshi corrected. Not warriors or conquerors, but caregivers and bridge builders. We showed them that strength comes in many forms. Through the observation windows, aliens were already approaching the docking bay, no longer afraid. They wanted to meet the humans who had befriended a Kryn. They wanted to learn, to understand, to connect. Dan took a deep breath and turned away from the window. Ash was gone, but the impact of their brief time together would echo through the galaxy for generations. Sometimes the smallest acts created the largest ripples. It was time to show the consortium what else humanity had to offer. 4 weeks had passed since the Kryn family departed Station Meridian. In that time, the human delegation had become the most sought-after consultants in consortium space. 12 different species had requested their assistance with predator-related problems. The Council had fast-tracked humanity's membership application, and the final vote was scheduled for today. Dan stood in the diplomatic chambers, watching through the massive windows as ships from hundreds of worlds gathered for the historic occasion. Somewhere among those vessels was the Kryn ship. Greth had sent word that she would attend the vote personally, bringing Ash and his parents as witnesses to human character. Nervous? Layla asked, standing beside him. She had spent the past month working with xenobiologists from across the consortium, teaching them the principles of animal behavior and predator psychology. Several species had already reported success using human techniques to resolve conflicts that had lasted for years. A little, Dan admitted. We came here hoping to be accepted as equals. Now we are being treated as some kind of miracle workers. We are not miracle workers, Hiroshi said, joining them at the window. We simply bring a different perspective. Earth made us learn to coexist with danger. Most species evolved on safer worlds. They never had to develop those skills. Commander Ralph entered the chamber. The Hralth commander had spent the past weeks shadowing the human delegation, learning their methods and applying them to his own security forces. His respect for humans had grown substantially, though he still struggled with some of the gentler approaches. The council is ready, Ralph announced. They will begin the vote shortly. I have been asked to provide testimony about the incident with the Kryn juvenile. What will you say? Dan asked. The truth, Ralph replied. That I tried to prove humans were weak and instead proved that I did not understand strength. That you faced down a predator with nothing but compassion and won its trust. That you changed my entire worldview in a single afternoon. They followed Ralph into the main chamber. The circular room was filled with representatives from every member species of the consortium. Councillor Breen sat in the primary administrator's seat, his compound eyes reflecting the light from hundreds of data screens. The air hummed with translated conversations in dozens of languages. Order, Breen called, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. We gather today to vote on the application of humanity for full membership in the Galactic Consortium. Before we begin, several witnesses have requested to speak. First, Commander Ralph of the Hralth Security Forces. Ralph stepped forward. For a being who had always carried himself with aggressive confidence, he looked almost humble now. 4 weeks ago, I believed humans were frauds. They claimed to come from a dangerous world, but they looked soft and defenseless. I designed a test to expose their weakness. I released a juvenile Kryn into their quarters, expecting them to panic and call for rescue. The chamber fell silent. Every species present knew about the incident, but hearing it described by the one responsible carried a different weight. Instead, Ralph continued, the humans approached the frightened, injured predator with gentleness. They removed its painful muzzle, treated its wounds, and fed it. Within hours, the most dangerous species in known space was sleeping peacefully in a human's arms. I learned that day that true strength is not about dominating others. It is about understanding them. He turned to look directly at the human delegation. I was wrong about humans. I was wrong about strength. I was wrong about many things. But I learned. The Hralth support human membership, and I personally vouch for their character. Ralph stepped back. Next, Greth moved forward. The elder Kryn had to crouch slightly to fit through the chamber doors, her massive frame drawing nervous reactions from several species. I speak for the Kryn people, Greth began. We have been part of this consortium for 70 years, but we have never felt welcomed. Other species fear us, avoid us, treat us as monsters to be contained. We accepted this because we believed there was no other way. Her yellow eyes found Dan in the crowd. Then humans showed us differently. They saw a frightened child, not a dangerous beast. They offered comfort instead of control. They reunited my grandson with his family and earned our eternal gratitude. The Kryn formally ally themselves with humanity. Where humans go, we will follow. More species came forward to testify. The Quellans spoke of how human consultants had resolved their aquatic predator problem without violence. discovering that the creature was simply protecting its eggs from structures built too close to its breeding grounds. The Velians described human techniques that had saved 3 of their colony worlds from predator conflicts. Even species that had initially opposed human membership now spoke in their favor. Finally, Councillor Breen called for the vote. All in favor of granting humanity full membership in the Galactic Consortium? Lights illuminated across the chamber as representatives registered their votes. Dan held his breath, watching the count climb on the central display. The number needed for approval was 67%. The current count was 73% and rising. When the final tally appeared, the number read 89% approval. The chamber erupted in applause, clicks, whistles, and a dozen other expressions of celebration. The motion passes, Breen announced. Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Consortium. Welcome to the galactic community. Hiroshi stepped forward to deliver the acceptance speech. He spoke of cooperation, mutual understanding, and the desire to learn from all species. He promised that humans would work to build bridges between species that had previously viewed each other with suspicion or fear. But Dan was not paying attention to the speech. His eyes were on the chamber entrance where Ash had appeared with his parents. The juvenile Kryn was significantly larger now, his growth accelerated by proper nutrition and care. But when those yellow eyes found Dan, they lit up with recognition. Ash broke away from his parents and ran across the chamber. Species scattered in panic, clearing a path for the approaching predator. But Ash had eyes only for Dan. The Kryn leaped and Dan caught him, staggering slightly under the increased weight. "Hey there, little one," Dan said, laughing as Ash chirped excitedly and nuzzled against his chest. "Look at how big you have gotten." Ash's mother approached, her massive frame causing several representatives to edge away nervously. But she simply watched as her son reunited with the human who had saved him. Her expression, as much as a Kryn's face could express emotion, seemed pleased.
"He speaks of you constantly," she said through her translator.
The human who was kind when others were cruel. The human who made him feel safe. You are part of his pack now, whether you are human or not. "I am honored," Dan said sincerely. He looked down at Ash, whose eyes were already drooping. Some things never changed.
"Still sleepy after all this time?"
Ash yawned, showing rows of sharp teeth that were much larger than they had been a month ago. The Kryn climbed into Dan's arms and settled down, just as he had that first day. Within moments, he was asleep. The chamber had fallen silent again. Hundreds of species representatives were watching a human hold a sleeping Kryn, an image that would have been unthinkable 2 months ago. Cameras captured the moment, preserving it for history. "This," Greth said, her voice carrying throughout the chamber, "is what humanity brings to the consortium. Not weapons or technology, but the ability to see past fear to the living being beneath. They will change our galaxy for the better." Councillor Breen approached the human delegation. "Ambassador Tanaka, the Council has a request. We would like to establish a new department dedicated to interspecies relations and predator psychology. We would like humans to lead this department." "We accept," Hiroshi said without hesitation. "But we will need time to bring more experts from Earth. This is not something 4 people can do alone." "Take all the time you need," Breen replied. The galaxy waited this long for someone who understands predators. "We can wait a little longer." Yuki was already making plans on her tablet. Layla was discussing research protocols with a group of interested xenobiologists. Hiroshi was fielding questions from a dozen different representatives. And Dan simply stood there holding a sleeping Kryn and marveling at how much had changed. Commander Ralph approached, his posture respectful. "I owe you an apology that I have not yet properly given. My test could have resulted in your deaths. I acted out of prejudice and arrogance." "You also learned from your mistake," Dan said. "Not everyone can do that. You have changed how the Hrelth view predators and prey. That matters more than the initial error." "Will you teach me more?" Ralph asked. "I want to understand what you understand. I want the Hrelth to be better than we were." "Of course," Dan agreed. "But it will take time. You have to unlearn a lot of old habits first." "I have time," Ralph said. He looked down at Ash. "That juvenile trusted you immediately. How did you know he would not attack?" "I did not know," Dan admitted. "But I understood that he was scared and hurt. In that moment, giving him compassion was worth the risk. And it turned out that compassion was exactly what he needed." Ash stirred in his sleep, making small, contented sounds. His crystalline spikes were completely flat, his body utterly relaxed. This was a predator that felt safe, loved, and protected. The ceremony continued around them, but Dan's world had narrowed to the weight in his arms and the warmth of the small body pressed against his chest. This was why humans had ventured into space, not to conquer or dominate, but to connect, to find common ground with beings that seemed completely alien at first glance. Earth had been a harsh teacher, but she had taught humanity well. Every species on that dangerous planet had something to offer, some lesson to share. Humans had learned to listen to those lessons, to adapt and grow and understand. Now they would teach those lessons to the galaxy. Ash's eyes opened briefly, locking onto Dan's face. The Kryn chirped softly, a sound of pure contentment, and then drifted back to sleep. His tail curled around Dan's arm, holding on even in slumber. "Welcome home," Dan whispered, though he was not entirely sure if he was speaking to Ash or to himself. Maybe it did not matter. Maybe home was wherever beings chose to care for each other, regardless of species or origin. Outside the chamber windows, ships from 1,000 worlds gathered in formation, celebrating humanity's acceptance into the galactic community. They came in all shapes and sizes, representing civilizations that had existed for millions of years. But in this moment, watching a human hold a predator with such tenderness, they were all learning something new. They were learning that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not claws or teeth or weapons. It was indifference. It was the failure to see the living being behind the fear. Humanity had looked at a frightened, injured predator cub and seen someone who needed help. That simple choice had changed everything, and this was only the beginning.